Okay. May I wish a very good day and a warm welcome to all the distinguished speakers and the participants in the second meeting of Breakout Group 2.5, which is entitled Increasing Roles of Private Sector in Enhancing Forest Education as part of the International Conference on Forest Education, jointly organized by the FAO, ITTO, and IUFRO, with generous financial support from the Federal German Ministry for Food and Agriculture. Meeting one was held yesterday, and there was a very rich discussion and exchange of views and inputs provided into the outcome of Breakout Group 1. Breakout Group 2.5 Meeting 1. So I'm hoping that Breakout Group 2.5 Meeting 2 will be equally rich, although we have a smaller group of participants. Now, we have three distinguished speakers lined up who will each present for approximately 15 minutes each on sharing their knowledge and experiences on the role that private sector plays in forest education. And prior to the speakers presenting, I will just give a short brief on setting the scene for this Breakout Group 2.5. A couple of little housekeeping notes. Once the three presenters have finished presenting, I will present 2 or 3 questions to the speakers and also to the audience. On the off chance that a member of the audience wishes to raise a point or comment or provide any inputs, please use the reaction button on the bottom of your screen. It is at the very right hand called reactions, and if you click on that, you will see the raise hand function. Please click the raise hand function, and one of our co-facilitators will unmute you and allow you the opportunity to speak. So we have about an hour and 15 minutes to complete our session because the AV team at the FAO will cut us off at the time that this session is supposed to end so that all participants can then prepare themselves for the second round of breakout group meetings happening directly after. Okay, so let me just set the scene here. Education is being recognized as a key means to build and influence the knowledge, skills, and values of citizens, to support sustainable development as well as skills for work life, ensuring decent work and entrepreneurship, as well as a pro-green development mental mindset. Private sector, as an important forestry stakeholder, has been taking steps to ensure that they exclude unsustainable and illegal wood from their supply chains. Many companies recognize the increasing need to understand and manage the environmental and social impacts embedded in their operations, supply chains, and investments. They are voluntarily taking on commitments and developing corresponding policies. Increasingly, industry associations strongly encourage and sometimes require their members to exclude unsustainable and/or illegal wood from their supply chains through members' codes of conduct, industry statements, or associations' own purchasing policies. Education plays pivotal roles in fulfilling forestry private sector's needs to ensure improving performance and the availability of their legal and sustainable products in a changing marketplace through building the capacity of their actors and employees. Likewise, the forestry private sector provides platforms for obtaining and disseminating information, knowledge, education, research, and experiences of education activities and actors. The breakout group on private sector is aimed at, firstly, learning on the increasing roles of private sector to respond to current challenges in forestry education. Secondly, identifying gaps and needs of forestry education to enhance the governance of forestry private sector in ensuring the implementation of sustainable forest management. And thirdly, confirming valid education formats and contents required by the private sector in current digital working life. So now, without further ado, may I invite the first speaker of the day, Dr. Marcelo Wiecheteck, I hope I pronounced your name properly, Marcelo, who is the Head of Strategic Development at STCP based in Brazil. Marcelo, please, the floor is yours.
Unmuting, okay, perfect. Thank you, Shem. Thank you, uh, Tetra, and thank you, ITTO and FAO for inviting STCP and myself to be a presenter in this distinguished section of the conference. I would like first to give you a good morning, good afternoon, and maybe good evening to everybody in the floor. I will start my presentation. It's right on screen. Just a second. Okay. Well, let's go with the contents. First, I would like just to say that it's a huge pleasure to participate in this event and to contribute to some extent to the advancement of the discussion on forest education. Forest education, to me, has taken a significant part of my life. Besides my school years in different academic institutions, I also have been involved with education and transferring forest knowledge as a professor and instructor at university level during a certain period of time. I have also worked for many years in the private sector, specifically in a pulp and paper company. And currently I work in the consulting business. And this ultimately deals with solving problems using forest knowledge and skills. My presentation will bring some background on the issue of forest education and the private sector, and we will present different perspectives of professional preparation, mainly at the universities and forest schools. Also the professional development that professionals have at work. We would like also to give some private sector perspective and priorities in terms of forest education and bridging both sides. Um, Technical skills, scientific knowledge, and innovative needs of forest professionals from the private sector point of view. And some examples I'd like to bring in the end of the relationship between private sector and forest education, particularly in Brazil. Next slide, please. Okay. Uh, well, it's well known the huge contribution of forest education to build knowledge, skills, and principles, values to all the professionals and the society as a whole, and also to the private sector as well. It has helped the private sector in so many ways with technical and scientific information, as well as intellectual capacity to fulfill its needs and make the private sector to reach its goals. On the other hand, we have the private forest sector that has played a key role in strengthening the forest education through variety of contributions, including knowledge, information, research opportunities, academic training, and also education provided by the private sector itself. So it's quite clear, and that is the point of this section, to explore the interdependence between forest education and the private sector. And this brings us a number of challenges and gaps that need to be constantly addressed. And just to name a few, we have the constant changes in the societal expectations of the goods and services that should be provided by forests, the specific demand for applied knowledge and research by the forest sector in its day-by-day activities, including improvement of forest productivity, environmental, social impacts, supply chains, investment, and so on. Technology is a key Also a key aspect that has to be addressed in terms of new developments, advancements. And this is currently a key input of the forest business competitiveness and has been addressed in another section of this conference as well. But it's well known the advances in the forest sector with, for example, geoprocessing technologies, also the use of drones, automation, robotics, both in forest operations and in the processing industry as well. And also new technology in forest inventory. And I'd like also to mention the necessary integration of different knowledges involving traditional indigenous community-based knowledges, in many instances, at least in the Amazon, dealing with non-wood forest products. So there is a lot of opportunities here in terms of this interdependence. Please, next slide. Well, I just would like to briefly address and start with some forest education aspects from the perspective of formal training and preparation of professionals in universities and technical schools. Over time, forest education has advanced from collection of data that is actually a raw material of information, or as we can say, raw knowledge itself, which initially needs to be transformed into information to be further processed and generate technical and scientific knowledge. That's what forest education is about. This has been the case in almost all areas of forest education: forest production, environment, social aspect, forest economics, and so on. Next, please. When we continue in this path in the professional development, and mainly at work for the professionals, both in the public and private sectors, we continue to transform this information into knowledge. So part of the knowledge is acquired in the university and technical school levels, and part is also bridged in the private and public sectors. But to a large extent, when we talk about the private sector, in terms of applied knowledge, this generate knowledge in forest education is both a process that happens in universities, technical schools, and at the workplace in the private sector. With time, professionals are also expected to gain experience. This is a very important aspect that's not limited to, or sometimes it's not obtained only in the universities and in the schools. And gaining experience is something that is done by practicing, as we can put, by knowing and working beyond the limits. And this ultimately can materialize in developed wisdom of the professional. Please, next. So, talking about the private sector and its main priority in terms of forest education, the private sector, we can say it constantly looks for innovation. And in this sense, to fulfill the requirements of the private sector, forest professionals need to have good training, skills, willing to gain experience, and to be engaged. And innovation is something new in the human activity. And it means either introducing something new or modifying something that already exists. And this applies to forest education as we are in a constantly changing world with changing demands and needs. So it implies in changes. And in the private forestry sector, it may involve, for instance, forest innovation in terms of the products, in terms of the process, in terms of marketing, and in terms of the organization itself. In terms of products, we can mention new goods and services or changing certain existing good or service. In terms of the process innovation, new methods of production, distribution, and also improvement of existing methods that are already in place. In terms of innovation marketing, new marketing methods, changing product design, visual identity, a contribution to sustainable development as well through marketing. And of course, in terms of organizational innovation, new system methods and managerial skills for organizing the operations. Please, next. Okay. Some current priorities in innovation for the forest sector implies in gain in competitiveness, efficiency to gain competitiveness, both in products and process, and the use of systems, compliance with social demands, improvement of governance, and compliance with social demands. This deals with safety and health, income distribution and gender, social inclusion. And in terms of improvement of governance, we have to talk about the compliance and legality as well, the three pillars of the governance, that is transparency, accountability, and security. We also have to address, in terms of the priorities, the mitigation of environmental impacts. And this deals, for instance, with reduction of the consumption of raw material, efficient use of water and energy, and also climate change and mitigation. Please, next, okay. So this previous slide showed us the main pillars of the so-called ESG criteria that it deals with the environment, social, and governance of the company. And ESG criteria talks about intangible assets that comprise the future enterprise value. This is a type of criteria that has been used mostly by major corporations, large companies, but because they are integrated into the supply chain and the productive chain involving a vast number of stakeholders, small, medium, large, this has started to evolve and engage all sort of businesses in these criteria. And forest education has a lot to do, or at least can offer a number of opportunities to advance in this new business focus. In terms of the environment, studies and knowledge in terms of climate change, pollution, biodiversity, water consumption. In terms of the social aspects, labor rules, inclusion, gender, customer satisfaction, data protection, and privacy. And also, to some extent, some contribution can come in the governance side, because factors that are important in terms of the governance aspect of companies are the audits, aspects related to bribery and corruption in some regions or in some companies, compensation of executives and shareholders, and also accounting methods. In all these areas, forest education can play an important role. Please, next. Okay, I also would like to stress from what we have talked about so far, the profile of this new professional, the innovative professional, what exactly is most important from the private sector point of view in terms of the needs. Good training with diversified information and a broad vision to solve problems, skills and dedication to transform information into knowledge, a professional that is willing to gain experience by practicing, also demonstrate engagement and dedication in the search of options for introducing these innovations, continuously improving efficiency to maintain the organization, the private sector organization competitive. And so we can, in brief, say that the market, the private sector requires professionals that are able to introduce innovation integrated to environmental, social, and governance demands. This brings us to the necessary partnerships. We need to strengthen partnerships between the private sector and the academic and technical schools to incorporate a new approach to forestry education. I think I have a note version on screen of my presentation. I just added 2 more slides that I would like to bring to you. Maybe it's not in this presentation, no problem. I will just talk to you and bring some initiatives that we have seen in Brazil in recent decades that probably can contribute to these strengthening partnerships that I'm talking about. They are just examples, but if I have a few more minutes, Shan, I just would like to bring these aspects to the floor. Forest education in Brazil has been built since the 1960s. The oldest forest course in the university started exactly in 1960. So over 60 years now of forest graduate course in Brazil. Currently, the country has 75 universities with forest engineering course, both undergraduate and graduate levels, master PhD. They are oriented towards regional aspects. We have to consider that about 60% of the country is covered with forests. We have a huge gradient of forests from the Amazon rainforest to the Cerrado, the Pampa-like, the savanna-like vegetation, and going south to the Atlantic rainforest. So it's natural that the universities have developed forest education and knowledge in different ways to fulfill different needs of the society in their regions. And we have seen a lot of partnerships with the private sector and also with universities abroad, like in Germany and France. And we also have technical schools, technical level schools, in terms of forest and agriculture, at least 15 in the country. I just would like to bring a few more aspects of the private sector itself and the initiatives that we have seen so far in terms of bridging this gap and strengthening the connection of both universities and the private sector. The private sector in Brazil provides a revenue of over $20 billion a year This is a figure of 2019 and representing nearly 2% of the GDP. It's highly diversified. It has a highly diversified supply chain, small and large companies. Brazil is the second largest producer of wood pulp, mainly from eucalyptus plantation. And in terms of forestry education, the framework to the private sector comes from a number of aspects. One of it is the United Nations SDG. A number of companies have signed the SDG, and specifically the number 4 for education. And they also hold a number of certification schemes that ultimately deals with the 3 pillars of economics, environment, and social aspects. The most important initiatives of the forest companies are the forest education programs that the vast majority of the companies keep. And this is a way to transfer knowledge to not only to professionals, but to the society in general by receiving in visits to the forest school students. Another important aspect in program is the landowner outreach. A significant area with plantation forests in Brazil is produced in small landowners properties and the technology they acquired from the companies. So we have knowledge and information in terms of new technologies that is transferred from the companies to these landowners. We also have lectures and academic weeks with communities and student internships, as well as trainee programs that connects the university with the private sector. I just would like to mention a few more words in terms of the public foundations of the university and some sector associations that have done a lot of work in terms of strengthening this bridge of the private sector and the universities and technical schools. Chiefly, the IPEF, the Forest Studies and Research Institute in São Paulo, the SIF, the Forest Research Society in Minas Gerais, and the FUPEF, the Forest Studies Foundation at Federal University of Paraná. They all have associate members, companies that pay a fee, and they are connected with universities through different cooperative programs and projects and knowledge transfer, technical extension services, and particularly IPEF right now is doing the innovation radar, that is technological screening of startups and research with potential to become startups. So this is my presentation, and I will be glad to join the group later for discussions. Thank you, Shan.
Thank you so much, Marcelo. It was a little bit long, but I'm grateful for all the information that you have shared with the group, you know. There could be lessons to be learned from what you have said, especially on the efforts that have, been taken or have been taken in Brazil. And what really struck me was the bridging between the public sector and the private sector. Because, it has been a known fact for many years that in many producing countries particularly, sometimes there is that gap. There is a gap between, cooperation and collaboration between the private sector and the public sector. And it's really interesting where you said private companies pay a fee to actually participate in these cooperation programs. So in yesterday's group, we discussed, certain elements linked to what you have also presented today. And of course, there's always a cost to certain things. And the question is, whether that could be too big a burden. But private sector companies generally, in their thirst for qualified professionals, to my experience and knowledge, do participate in such efforts. But thank you, Marcelo. You have given plenty of food for thought for the rest of the participants in the group. Now, as the clock is ticking, so I would now like to invite our second distinguished speaker, Madame Hortense Elamenye-Batindek, who is the Head of Communications and M&E from ADIFAC and ATIBT. Hortense, the floor is all yours.
Yes,
Welcome.
good morning.
Good morning.
I will speak English, but so I am better in French, but I present the slide in English.
Thank you, Hortense.
Yes, I will.
Thank you. We are grateful.
Some comments in French, excuse me.
No problem, no problem.
Okay, so ADIFAC is a project to improve training offer for private company in forest and wood sector. Next, please. Slide. Okay. This project is led by ITTO and Wiecheteck. Wiecheteck is a networking of training institution in the forest sector. ITTO, International Technical Tropical Timber Association, is the manager of this project. So ITTO was founded in 1951 at the request of IUFRO and OECD to organize and streamline sustainable tropical timber trade. So ITTO, a leading technical and scientific authority, a key partner of industry professional, a manager of international program. Next, please. Next slide. Okay. ADIFAC is developed in 4 countries. 4 countries are involved in this project. We have Cameroon, Congo, Gabon, DRC. So we have a main area of intervention, training of companies to better define and communicate education needs, training and coaching of local teachers to develop continued training module and that reply to be needs of the private sector. This project is financed by AFD. Next, please. Okay. The principal challenge for forestry education by this project ADIFAC, we have lack of technical and mid-manager staff in many organizations. We're facing new challenges leading to new needs of like industrialization, plantation, carbon, certification, so on the new legal obligation about legal timber, for example. We have also low level of basic education in forest area. None of those challenges can be faced without deeper contribution for the private sector. So, excuse me, I want to explain in French that le projet ADIFAC vient justement mettre en lien le secteur privé, les entreprises privées et les institutions de formation pour co-construire justement des formations adaptées aux besoins réels des acteurs du secteur. Maintenant, le rôle de du secteur privé est réellement de s'approprier de la fonction formation, dans les entreprises et de savoir identifier les problématiques de formation liées à leurs employés. Donc, le projet ADEFAC ici va aider les entreprises à mieux gérer, à mieux gérer leur fonction formation en les formant à la gestion prévisionnelle des emplois et compétences, ce qui permet justement de mieux, comment je peux dire ça, ce qui permet de mieux comprendre les problématiques du secteur. Next, please. Okay. From usual response to our deeper contribution, on-the-job learning, accepting intense trainings, we've offered a lack of coordination with the school and university. Main opportunities, participation in governance of training institution, development of partnership with school, university to better train and supervise trainings, for example, dual training, make human resource management evolve and put training at its strategic place, organize professional organization to better express their needs. Justement, là, pour les opportunités, tout à l'heure, j'ai évoqué justement cette fonction, le rôle des ressources humaines dans la fonction formation. Et justement, plusieurs opportunités sont offertes à ces entreprises pour améliorer leur gestion du personnel, justement. Parce que nous avons dans ces entreprises, nous n'avons pas que les grandes entreprises, nous ne ciblons pas que les grandes entreprises, nous ciblons également les petites entreprises, les artisans, les TPE, les artisans, qui n'ont pas forcément des fonctions ressources humaines développées, mais qui ont besoin également de savoir exprimer leurs difficultés, leurs besoins en formation. Et pour cela, dans le cadre du projet ADEFAC, nous avons élaboré une cartographie des métiers. Et là également, cette cartographie des métiers, c'est un outil pour pouvoir dialoguer avec le secteur privé et pour pouvoir identifier les réelles compétences à développer. Parce que parfois, on forme juste pour former, alors qu'il y a des besoins spécifiques de formation dans des compétences précises. Donc, à ce moment-là, nous avons les institutions de formation et les entreprises qui peuvent justement, à partir des compétences identifiées, définir des formations liées à des compétences spécifiques, comme par exemple dans l'affûtage ou le séchage du bois. Next, please. Okay. For education format and current digital area, we can see that private sector needs for training and GSES, database management, wood tracking, treatment of drone data, and wildlife image made by camera traps. We note also that training institutions need regularly new training materials, computer, handling, and software updates. Training institutions need regular training of their teachers. That is very, very, very important to train teachers to have a staff of teachers who have the capacity to train adults. Donc, dans notre approche également, nous mettons un accent sur la formation des formateurs avec une approche andragogie, de formation des adultes. Et ces formateurs-là peuvent être issus du secteur privé comme des institutions de formation. À ce moment-là, nous aurons des formateurs qui sont des experts du secteur privé, mais nous aurons aussi des formateurs qui sont des enseignants, qui pourront donc répondre aux besoins de renforcement des capacités des acteurs de l'Afrique centrale. Okay. We note also the problem of electricity on Internet. Dans nos pays, la grosse difficulté est l'accès facile à l'Internet et à l'électricité. Avec la pandémie Covid, le contexte de Covid-19, de plus en plus, les formations doivent se faire à distance et l'outil informatique est indispensable. Donc, moi, je vous parle actuellement, j'aurais craint qu'il y ait une coupure d'électricité avec la saison de pluie, mais là, tout se passe bien, je n'ai pas de coupure, je peux communiquer avec vous et vous présenter donc ma participation. Sur ce, je vous remercie.
Hortense, thank you. That was a wonderful presentation which truly reflects the situation on the ground in the region that you're working in, with all the difficulties and the challenges that societies have to face, most of all, of course, through the private sector and the public sector in terms of educational needs and training. You're absolutely right that whatever that the private sector invests in would be in response to industry needs, in churning out the most qualified people. And it's great that both you and Jacqueline, who presented yesterday, highlighted this need for adult training as well. In other words, the training for mature people rather than, from the secondary to tertiary level, for those who have missed out on technical training in their earlier years, but get a job in the forestry sector. Naturally, they would definitely require such educational needs too. But thank you for that. Again, very thought-provoking inputs. And now may I invite our third speaker, Dr. Francois Hyol, who is a consultant with Wiecheteck, and he has been very closely involved in a number of educational projects in collaboration with ITTO. And we have just heard that Wiecheteck and IDFAC have also done a number of efforts together. Francois, we would love to hear what you have to say. Thank you. Please go ahead. Francois, are you there? I think we may have lost Francois. Oh dear. Can someone help to see if we can get Francois back? That's really odd because he was with us at the beginning of the breakout group.
Yes.
Yes.
Shim, I've seen he has disappeared as well.
Yes,
would you like me to present for him? I can try to. I'm not
okay,
a Wiecheteck specialist, but yeah. But
yes,
I speak English and it's not such a I know more or less what he will be saying, so I can try.
Fantastic, Jacqueline. Thank you so much. Oh my God, what would we do without you? Please start, and if Francois does come back on board, he can take over. That would be fantastic. Thank you so much.
No problem.
Thank you. Please go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. If you could just start the presentation of Francois.
Tetra, can you please swing this? There, that's it. Okay.
As Hortense just said, here in Africa, we quite often have electricity cuts. And if there's not a generator, well, we're just blocked out of everything. So perhaps this happened to Francois. So Francois Jolliol is a forestry expert, and he also is a trainer at the university in Cameroon. In this presentation, I will briefly explain to you what Wiecheteck is all about. So the African Network of Forestry and Environment Education Training Institutions. The efforts that are done to develop training in Central Africa, and some gaps and needs with regard to forestry training in order to obtain sustainable forest management, because that's really the goal. Next slide, please. So as you all know, Central Africa contains the second largest amount of forest in the world. We lately heard that it became the first, because in Brazil so much forest is disappearing that now Central Africa is becoming the first biggest block in the world. And so it's very important to protect all those forests. And therefore, the different countries in Central Africa work together. And there's a special commission that has been raised in 2005, which is the Commission of Forestry Ministers in Central Africa. They also developed a plan, the Plan de Convergence, which set out strategies to protect forests and to include all actors in protecting the forest and managing them sustainably. Next slide, please. So the network of forest and environmental training institutions in Central Africa replies to one of the strategic axes of the Commission of Forestry Ministers in Central Africa, which talks about the role of education. And today, well, here it says 23, but it's already more. Today there are 28 institutions that are member of Wiecheteck. So it's quite a lot. They're mainly a university or high-level schools, and they are schools that train people to work in the ministries, actually, so that work for the governments. Next slide, please. So Wiecheteck works very closely together with the different governments in Central Africa, but also with the donors and with ITTO. So, for example, Wiecheteck has benefited from ITTO projects to improve the schoolings, actually to improve the buildings that were deteriorated a bit, to develop training modules that really reply to the needs of forest conservation, of forest management. And it also allows to give grants to good students to make them do their PhD wherever in the world. Here I see Canada, but others also go to Europe or to America. So much work is done to make sure that schoolings have the material they need and the trainers they need, the professors they need to give good forestry education. And several projects are lined up. These are projects, and also in collaboration with forestry concession holders. So what is very important, of course, in these trainings is the link with the field and to get experience in the field.
Jacqueline, yes. I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I think Francois is back online.
Oh, that would be nice.
Yes,
Perfect.
I've just seen his name. So
you've done
perfect. So well. You've done fantastically well. But
Thank you.
I hope we can hear Francois.
Yeah.
Francois, are you there? Oh, God. Yes, he is still online. Francois, Jacqueline, very kindly.
Je m'excuse beaucoup, ma connexion Internet est partie.
Right.
Oui,
but we see
vraiment,
you're back
je m'excuse. Voilà, merci beaucoup à Jacqueline. d'avoir pris le relais. Merci beaucoup, Shem. Voilà, en fait, le RIFEAC, comme elle a présenté, c'est plus de 25 institutions maintenant qui sont en réseau et qui a la demande en matière de formation en Afrique centrale. Nous avons une forêt qui est très importante pour les populations et pour l'humanité. Et il faut des professionnels pour pouvoir la gérer. Donc voilà, on a de nombreux appuis de partenaires. Il y a eu un certain nombre de grands projets qui ont été mis en œuvre dans les pays, les 10 pays de l'Afrique centrale, membres de la COMIFAC, qui est la Commission des forêts d'Afrique centrale. Donc, on a un appui qui a été donné par le Fonds sur les forêts du bassin du Congo. C'était une initiative qui était avec la Norvège, le Royaume-Uni et le Canada, qui avait mis un fonds à la BAD, dans la Banque africaine de développement. Cela a concerné 9 institutions et il y a eu beaucoup de réalisations. Et l'OIBT a toujours été à côté du RIFEAC depuis plusieurs années, depuis le début des années 2000, mais notamment avec le projet 456-07 qui a réalisé beaucoup de choses. Il y a eu un programme de référence en aménagement forestier que nous utilisons aujourd'hui dans les institutions forestières membres du RIFEAC. On a eu aussi des constructions et des réhabilitations des infrastructures, dotation du matériel roulant, des équipements forestiers dont on a besoin pour faire les travaux pratiques, faire des visites de terrain. Je donne juste un exemple. Entre 2015 et 2016, on a dépensé, enfin l'OIBT a dépensé environ 2 millions de dollars américains pour la construction et la réhabilitation et la provision des équipements. Next slide, please. L'OIBT toujours, dans le cadre de l'activité 5 du programme LSC. LSC stands for Legal and Sustainable Supply Chain, c'est-à-dire que le développement des programmes sur les chaînes d'approvisionnement légales et durables du bois, destiné aux pays d'Afrique centrale. C'est un financement de la BMZ. Ce n'était pas beaucoup, mais c'était important pour pouvoir appuyer le RIFEAC dans le développement de 4 modules de formation. Et ces modules-là touchaient, n'est-ce pas, le cœur même des aspects de l'approvisionnement en bois. Le premier module concernait comprendre le concept de sans déforestation, évaluer, le deuxième, c'était évaluer la légalité et mettre en place la responsabilisation. Et le troisième module, c'était de la légalité à la durabilité. Et le quatrième module traiterait des marchés et de leur accès. Il y a une suite à ce projet parce que les modules ont été produits et la suite de ce projet actuellement, c'est chercher à disséminer les modules, les rendre opérationnels. Donc, ce projet est en cours de démarrage. Alors, il y a aussi l'appui de la GIZ. La GIZ est aux côtés du RIFEAC depuis un moment et vise beaucoup plus le renforcement des capacités institutionnelles et organisationnelles du RIFEAC et le développement des outils stratégiques. Et Par exemple, la GIZ a développé les directives sous-régionales en matière de formation. Et c'est très important parce que c'est un cadrage politique. La GIZ a aussi développé, en fait, est en train de développer un cadre stratégique à la formation. Donc, c'est très important et il y a un appui pour la formation en ligne, hein, qui est très important par rapport, n'est-ce pas, au développement. En bref, la GIZ vise la modernisation, en fait, des outils ou des techniques pédagogiques, hein, qui doivent être utilisées par les institutions membres du RIFEAC. Bon, les deux prochains projets qui sont là, c'est-à-dire le PARAF et la DEFAC, vont être suffisamment présentés par ma collègue ou ont été suffisamment présentés par ma collègue Hortense, visent davantage à capaciter nos institutions à répondre à l'adéquation emploi-formation, surtout avec le secteur privé. Donc, on a noté que on faisait beaucoup de choses, d'accord, mais on n'arrivait toujours pas à répondre aux besoins du secteur privé. Next slide, please. Alors, on peut donc se rendre compte que il y a eu beaucoup de choses de fait qui, depuis 2 décennies, ont permis que les contenus des programmes de formation évoluent. Parce que ça, il faut dire que les premiers programmes de formation visaient à former des professionnels qui devaient, n'est-ce pas, travailler dans l'administration, qui devaient remplacer l'administration coloniale de l'époque. Et au fur et à mesure qu'on a avancé avec la promotion de la gestion durable, on a senti un besoin de faire évoluer ces programmes pour que ces programmes répondent aux nouvelles donnes, aux nouvelles fonctions qui étaient là sur le plan institutionnel. Donc, cela s'est fait. Mais le problème qu'on constate et qui demeure, c'est que les travaux pratiques restent très limités. Et c'est vraiment un grand défi. Il y a eu tous ces appuis qu'on a obtenus, mais les travaux pratiques restent très limités. Et les explications sont dues au fait que, d'accord, les partenaires apportent des outils, ils apportent des équipements, ils reconstruisent les bâtiments. Mais le problème, c'est le renouvellement de tout cela. C'est-à-dire, vous savez, que ce soit les bâtiments, que ce soit le matériel roulant, que ce soit les équipements, à un moment donné, ils sont vétustes, ils sont usés, il faut les remplacer. Et ça, c'est le grand challenge, le grand défi que nous avons dans nos pays. Il n'y a pas de stratégie dans les établissements ou dans le pays en général, les pays, pour pouvoir assurer le renouvellement de ces aides. Les partenaires ne peuvent pas être là pour donner ou à financer ces possibilités tous les fois. Alors, il y a aussi l'absence d'un cadre de concertation permanent entre le secteur privé et l'enseignement forestier. Par contre, ce cadre existe avec les administrations, mais on regrette que l'enseignement n'est pas impliqué pour pouvoir communiquer en temps réel avec le secteur privé et adresser, en fait, qu'il y ait une concertation sur ce qu'il faut faire. Bon, l'autre côté, c'est aussi qu'on n'a pas toujours la formation qui est suffisante. Moi, je suis un enseignant. On n'a pas toujours la formation qui est suffisante pour pouvoir, n'est-ce pas, adresser les problèmes qui viennent, les sollicitations du secteur privé. Il y a par exemple les problèmes de traçabilité maintenant. On parle de la gouvernance, hein, et cela demande des systèmes à mettre en place, des outils qu'il faut constamment mettre à jour. Il y a la gestion des conflits, hein. Vous savez, chez nous, il y a tous les aspects sociaux de la gestion qui sont là, qui demeurent des épines. Il y a la restauration des paysages, parce que nos forêts se dégradent. Hein. On passe déjà à la deuxième génération des plans d'aménagement. Et donc, voilà, il y a tous ces problèmes qui restent un défi. Et je pense qu'avec ça, j'ai fait le tour. Next slide, I think is the end. Yeah, so thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Francois. Just like Hortense, your presentation is also very informative and correctly reflects what is it that has been stopping or halting sufficient progress in forest education in the region that you work in. You are absolutely right that fundamental basics are lacking. I mean, this has been clear from all three presentations, more so from yours and Madame Hortense's presentation for Central Africa. And this is where I thank you for highlighting the project that you were involved in with ITTO, which did help to an extent to provide basic infrastructural needs. I mean, Hortense mentioned that, access to continuous electricity is an issue, and we experience that right now with you when you lost your connection. And I'm so sorry that that happened, but thank you to Jacqueline for helping us out while you could rejoin us again. So that's been fantastic. Now, as we can tell, apart from basic infrastructural needs, finance is another issue, of course. The sustainability of such efforts is a challenge, I think, for many societies and forest sectors internationally, particularly in developing countries. Now, let's move to the next stage. We have basically 16 minutes left before they cut us off and throw us back into the plenary session. We had drafted 3 questions that we were supposed to put to the speakers. The first one is, what are current challenges of forestry education that could possibly be addressed by private sector? And to what extent can private sector contribution improve the situation? Now, the good news is all 3 of you have already answered that question. So I don't think there is a particular need for the speakers to go through the answers to this again, because it is all within your presentations already. Secondly, what gaps and needs could be identified in efforts to enhance the governance in forestry sector to achieve sustainable forest management? Again, I think this element has been quite clearly answered by all 3 of you from the different perspectives that you face in your regions. And thirdly, what kind of education format and contents need to be adapted to the current digital era? Now, again, here we have seen live examples of why the current digital era may not be totally suitable for everyone, particularly in the forest sector, particularly also in developing regions. And if there is no basic amenities such as continuous electrical power, digital learning takes a backseat. So that appears to be one of the most basic conditions that needs to be met, apart from financing as well. And a number of you also mentioned this lack of practical training, hands-on training. So perhaps digital learning can be complementary, provided, of course, there is access to it. Now, I would invite participants in the group to please offer your views or pass your comments or offer your support to any participant in the group if you have direct questions that are a little bit different compared to the 3 that I just read out to you and that was on the screen. Please use the reactions raise hand function, or you can also type your question in the chat box. And I will give you 1 minute to see if anybody wishes to raise their hands, or I might have to invite the speakers themselves one by one, just to give a quick closure to the work of the breakout group. Come on, participants. However early or late it is in your regions. I mean, there are already a number of nice comments in the box that were directly translated by Jacqueline. Jacqueline, thank you so much for your help. The continuous vocational training, we talked about adult training. It's not only the maintenance of materials, but also of human resources, the need for human resources professionals, also within private sector to identify private sector needs. In other words, to actually produce a workforce that is fit for purpose, that fits the purpose of the private sector. We also talked about governance issues. We talked about social and environmental impacts. And the economic impact has been indirectly touched upon. In other words, resources that are needed to finance such efforts, long-term or medium-term. Again, I keep inviting raising of hands. Would anyone wish to speak, please? The clock is ticking, guys. We have 12 minutes. Would anyone like to make a comment?
Jen is asking floor.
Who, sorry? Yeah, please. Yeah. Chen, go ahead.
Oh, hi, Sham. Sorry.
Please go ahead. Hi.
Yeah,
No, go
it's
ahead.
a bit difficult to see the hand raised.
I know.
Especially when I know what you mean. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you to all the speakers. I think it's been really very useful contributions that you have made, actually, and it actually helps us a lot to figure out what is being done and what are the gaps and challenges. So kudos to all of you. It brings to mind, actually, there are probably a couple of points that I would like to bring up. First is that I think it is not necessary that everything we do with regards to forestry education has to be done through the formal sector, the pedagogy side. I think we have to figure out how the informal side or the short courses, events, whatever we're going to call it, including conferences like this, how those can actually help to mold the participants, the training to be, participants to be more rounded, I think. So that it's not just fixed on the technical operational aspects of forestry, because those are important, obviously, but those have got challenges on its own, as was mentioned by Ivan and Marcelo. You don't get people to think innovatively if you just fix on those. So we need to see how we can expand and complement the training with others. The other aspect that I think would be useful is that forestry sector itself is facing a lot of new challenges. Formal education, because of its rigid structure, takes time to be revised, to modify, to get the training materials, the lecturers going, up to speed and so on, before they can roll out the new curriculum and so on. So the supplementary work that needs to be done, either through guest training or through partnerships with NGOs, other academia, other sectors, and so on, would be useful because, as was mentioned, environmental, social, and governance, the ESG components, those are critical, but I suspect there might be certain gaps in that as well, because I did not see mention about indigenous peoples, local communities, because they do have a responsibility as well to manage the forest and also to enter the supply chain, know how they can contribute from the policy level all the way down to the legal framework, even the changes, and also supporting the work that's being done through all the industrial sector part of it. And then the other aspects of it, like non-timber forest products and other forest products, including animals, that are found in the same habitat. How does forestry training then allow for all this diversity to be managed well for livelihoods, but also economic development? Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chen. You've brought up a very, very important point, actually, because that's another element that has been discussed quite extensively, not just at the International Conference on Forest Education, but also in other international meetings over the years. It's cross-sectoral training for all the different sectors, which are not forestry per se, but of course is part of forestry, and whether there has been enough focus on those elements. Would anyone else wish to offer a comment? Or if you have a response to what Chen has just said, please do so. Otherwise, I'm going to have to call on speakers to pass, their last thoughts before we wrap up this group. We have about 10 minutes left. Would anyone wish to offer their thoughts? Please don't feel shy. We welcome any of you. I see Francois raising his hands. Tetra, can you please unmute Francois?
Yes. Sorry,
Okay.
I didn't. I forgot about that. Okay, thank you for giving me the floor. I really, I'm happy to hear what Shane has said about the informal sector, because what we see now is that participation, or whether we like it or not, of the informal sector. And that there's really something to do, to take that group as a very important target. And I'm not sure how we can do it, because since they are informal, it means that we can't really get hold of them easily. But about the indigenous people, we really still lack tools, how to really address the issues regarding indigenous people. We've made a good progress with community forestry. That is, of course, based on what the law is requiring. Community forestry will be increasing, especially council forestry. Thank you. That's the comment I just wanted to make. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francois. Thank you very much for that. I mean, we know how active RIFIAC has been in Central Africa, together with the work that you've done with COMIFAC and also other organizations like the African Development Bank and etc. Now, to have 28 institutions under RIFIAC is already a huge success. But I totally understand the need for funding and the sustainability, in order to manage the sustainability of such efforts requires continuous investment in that particular effort. And we wish RIFIAC and COMIFAC all the success for the future. Would anyone else wish to share your thoughts with us? Hortense, maybe you have some last words, or Marcelo for that matter. Marcelo, would you like to offer 2 minutes of your thoughts? We welcome that. Marcelo,
Yes, can I?
Marcelo is on mute or was on mute. Okay. That's good.
Okay.
Yes.
I just would like to add that in my view, forest education would need to go beyond just teaching technical, scientific skills. And in the future, it also should incorporate some competencies that are very useful in the workplace. That would allow for better forest management and practices, and actually to meet the private sector demand and the society needs as a whole. For instance, managerial skills, market intelligence, competencies in leaderships. Also, we have talked about the innovation. I don't know to which extent this is something that has been brought to the universities and to the technical course. Skills in terms of decision making, for instance, communication, personal interrelationship. That is something that is still lacking in the formal forest education training in universities. And this is maybe why the forest sector consider that there is a insufficient preparation of the forest graduates these days still. And the focus of the university sometimes doesn't match the requirements of the society, or let's say, particularly on the private sector. But of course, I think the private sector can do more than it has done. And for problems of underfunding, for instance, and resource, I think the private sector can step in and support with like scholarships, research grants, and as I mentioned in Brazil, memberships and university cooperatives, the programs that would allow for this bridge to be more efficient.
Thank you so much, Marcel. What you're saying is also similar to what Chen had said earlier, in terms of sharpening these skills, introducing these elements into forestry training to produce more well-rounded people, well-rounded people with multiple skills rather than just the technical knowledge or the experience. But very helpful comments and thoughts, which we will make sure we include in the breakout group report. Finally, can I invite Hortense to share your views, Hortense, if you wish to? Hello, Hortense, are you still there?
Yes, thank you. What I can say that the forest sector has significant training needs and many challenges. And so I think that we must take account of the various beneficiaries in different area, in different countries, but also and above all of gender. We have to integrate gender approach because we have the women's situation. The women's situation are very specific in the lack of training in this forest sector. So I think that we have to consider the specific needs of the women in all of our projects, in all of our initiatives.
Thank you, Hortense. ITTO can only fully support that because we do have a set of gender guidelines, and we have just upgraded our environmental and social management guidelines as well. So perhaps, it's time for ATIBT and ITTO to have another discussion on how we can work together. And just in connection to that, we have run a couple of pilot projects in Africa, in Togo and Ivory Coast, taking the gender approach in a positive bias, in other words, to improve the living conditions and livelihoods of women. Let's talk separately on that one.
We have 50 seconds.
Okay, that's it. Right, everyone, I think it's just enough for us to close the show. And a big hand and applause and thank you to the speakers primarily and the participants, and not forgetting the support teams who have been in the room. Apologies for no translation. Don't forget to do the call to action. And don't forget to try the LSSC online learning course from ITTO. Thank you very much, and we see you in the next round of breakout groups. Please join 3.1 if you wish to have a further discussion on digital opportunities. That's it. We're closing in 8 seconds. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been a wonderful group. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.